finished up last time, Scott, you said something that like really stuck with me that we thought would be a cool whole episode, or at least start of an episode.
Yeah.
What was it?
About how rock is dead, or how all rock is dad rock.
All rock is dad rock. That's so good.
So I went and saw Spoon this weekend at the Ryman on Sunday. Me and my wife went and saw Spoon, and it was a good show. It was a good time. And a couple years ago, I was worried. I was like, is Spoon dad rock now? Like, is it not a cool rock band anymore? You know, because in my mind, when I first was exposed to Spoon, I was like, it's a cool band. Like, it's a cool current rock and roll band. And then, you know, flash forward like 10 years, I'm like, so like, is that still real? You know?
Turned out rock's been dead for 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
So we all know, like, everyone says rock and roll's dead all the time, but why is rock dead? You know what I mean? Like, why is rock and roll dead, and why is all rock dad rock?
Yeah, well, so this has taken a while for me to, like, come to terms with, because I don't want rock to be dead. But, because it first started when we had Fastball on the podcast. Because I'd been wondering for a while at that point. I was like, why is it, like, the whole time I was growing up, and then, like, through, you know, my early adult years, there were a lot of rock songs that were, like, hit songs. Like, you could top the charts with a rock and roll song. And then that's just kind of gone away. Like, everything's, you know, hip-hop and...
Yeah, at best, like, something on pop radio might have a guitar on it.
Yeah, but it's definitely not like rock and roll bands anymore.
It's a sliding bar is like what's considered rock.
Yeah,
if it has the sound of a guitar, it's considered rock.
Yeah, and so in my mind, I was like, is it just that rock musicians have lost the ability to write rock songs? Because I remember, because when people were worried about it, like really worried about rock dying, it was the Strokes came out, and they were like the last great hope. You know, the Strokes came around, and we were like, okay, if these guys have the best chance of like keeping rock alive, and it did not happen. And part of that is, and you hear like Dr. Luke talk about, like they don't have like hit songs, like they don't write songs with hooks. Like,
rock is not hit songs.
No, the Strokes don't.
Strokes don't.
Strokes are a cool band. They write cool songs. Like everything about the Strokes is super cool. They don't write hit songs. They don't write like poppy hooks. You know.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, I was always kind of wondering, like, is it just that rock musicians have lost the ability to write hit songs? Like, do you think the Bon Jovis of the world is not out there anymore?
Is it that they're not writing hit songs, or is it that what was considered the culture of rock and roll is just not how people live anymore?
Yeah, rock and roll is irrelevant. That's the problem now, right? So when we had Fastball on the podcast, after we wrapped up the podcast, I think you took Miles to the bathroom. You know, Miles was like, hey, where's the bathroom? So you showed him where it was. And so I was just chatting with Tony, and I was like, hey, as a guy who's written, because, you know, Tony wrote all the, like, big, you know, hit Fastball songs. I was like, hey, as a guy who's, like, written chart-topping rock songs, I was like, why do you think that doesn't happen anymore? And he said, oh, it's because rock is dead. I was like, huh? Okay. And then they kind of switch places. So then, you know, Miles comes back in, and then Tony goes to the bathroom. And I was like, I'm going to ask Miles this question. So I asked Miles, I said, hey, why is it that, like, bands aren't topping the charts anymore with rock and roll songs? And he was like, haven't you heard? Rock is dead. I was like, okay. And so then, you know, that's kind of what got me thinking about it. And then flash forward a few months later, I went to this talk that Chuck Klosterman gave at this bookstore here in town. He's promoting his latest book, and so I'm like, okay, like I'll listen to him, like, read part of his book and talk about stuff. Like, it's free, you know. And he's one of my favorite authors. So I go and we're there, and it's like, you know, it's a respectable crowd, but, you know, and he didn't really read from the book at all. He was just like, well, let's just do a Q&A. He was like, you guys just ask me questions and I'll talk about things. And so, you know, when he got to me, I basically just asked, what do you mean when you say rock is dead? Because he wrote about this in, you know, some of his books. And I can't give you his exact answer because it was very long and involved and much more interesting than I am about anything. And he was basically talking about, like, rock is dead the way that jazz is dead. Okay? And that there are still people that make it. There are still people that listen to it, but it's culturally irrelevant now. Like the book is closed. The whole rock canon has been written. Like there's never going to be another.
And that's all because of the culture surrounding the style of music.
Part of because okay, so a big chunk of what made people like rock music, or a part of what makes rock music what it is it's a style of music written and performed by young people for young people that has like young people themes, you know, like rebellion and all that, and it's also a musical genre that was pioneered by current young people's grandparents. Okay, that's a lot of why it's irrelevant, is that whatever genre is going to speak to young people needs to be like a current genre. And really, when you think about it in terms of how long rock existed, like it basically had a good 50-year run. So basically, if you look at the history of the 20th century,
well, when rock came out, it was pop music.
Yeah.
So by the same way you're saying like all rock is dad rock, you could also say all rock is indie rock.
How so?
Because if you think about it, like by definition, it's indie rock. Like as soon as it becomes mainstream, it's not indie anymore.
Well, I feel like that speaks to the fact that we have two competing definitions of what we call pop music. Okay, so the problem there is we have one style of music called pop music, which is what you think of like, you know, like our parents' generation, grandparents' generation would call it bubblegum pop. So that's like, you know, your Britney Spears and your you know, like a current would be like a Demi Lovato, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a style of music. But also when we talk about pop music, we also can mean popular music, like music that just just performs well on the radio. And the fact that we use the same word to mean those two similar but different things really confuses people.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. So rock is no longer popular or bubblegum.
Yeah, well, I mean, pop music, in terms of pop music being a style of music, that's still out there. That's still a thing.
Yeah.
You know? But rock music being popular music has basically gone away. So basically, if you look at like the 20th century, the history of music of the 20th century, the first half of the 20th century was mostly like the defining genre was jazz. The second half of the 20th century, the defining genre was rock music, right? And when you think about one genre hanging on that long, it's actually kind of crazy, because like another thing that Chuck Klosterman talks about is there was a good span of time, like when I was a teenager, or, you know, maybe a little bit older, that it was reasonable for a dad and his son to both have the same favorite band, and that band be U2.
Yeah.
whereas when you think about popular music, because popular music is for young people, right? Like chart-topping pop hits are for young people. And the idea that a dad and his son would be into the same thing is kind of crazy to think about. Because you think about like my parents or your grandparents' generation, whatever the baby boomers are to you. You think about the fact that like they got into rock music, but their parents did not like rock music. Like they hated the rock music because they grew up on like big band jazz, you know, and so like there was a big generational divide there. Whereas that generational divide kind of got swallowed up with rock and roll for like kind of two whole generations, you know, plus or minus a little bit on either end, to where rock music was like the genre. Well, that the place in society that rock music held for our generation, people, you know, older and younger than us, that's been supplanted by hip hop.
Yeah.
So hip hop is now the like cool music that speaks to young people, that speaks to their rebellion, that speaks to their tastes and kind of their way of interacting with the world. They don't interact with the world via like rock and roll songs. They interact with it with hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
So like if Post Malone was 10 years older, he would have been in a rock band.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of similarities, like in just the rawness and like the message and like the cultural implication of hip hop now and rock and roll kind of when we were kids.
Yeah.
You know, and if we were kids now, I feel like we'd be into hip hop the same way too.
Yeah, and I feel like I'm experiencing some of that generational divide that, say, like my parents' parents ran into, the generation that was into big band and then rock and roll came about. that's kind of the generational divide that I'm seeing, or that I feel like I'm experiencing to a degree.
Yeah.
Where hip hop's coming around, and like the new hip hop that people really love, like I don't really get it. Like I don't really see the appeal, you know. But I'm also it's that like I'm not their target demo in the first place.
Yeah, but
it doesn't matter.
And if you look at these like young hip hop artists, you got like the way they're getting their music out is SoundCloud, and it's this community where they're like people are rising up in this community of like SoundCloud, you know, rappers where they put their music up for free just to try to get attention and build this thing. And it was kind of like what we used to do in rock bands with like cassettes, you know?
Yeah.
It's like the digital version of that same kind of movement. Like I remember being a kid and like trying to promote, you know, I remember like recording things on cassette and handing them around and stuff, you know? And that's what I think about like with SoundCloud. It feels like that same kind of hustle to me. You know, when you see people hustling their music on there on this like free platform that doesn't really pay any royalties, you know, it's interesting. I don't think SoundCloud pays any royalties. I think that's kind of the one crux about SoundCloud. It's a little strange, but yeah, all rock is dad rock. You're right.
Yeah. So that's where the all rock is dad rock is like. So the canon's complete. No, like rock music. Yet again, people still make it. People still listen to it. None of that matters because none of it's relevant. It's like nobody's making relevant, or by and large, I guess when you say nobody, somebody can come out and be like, well, actually, but by and large, people aren't making relevant rock music anymore. Like all the relevant music is hip hop and you know, pop.
Plus, the value of musicianship has kind of changed in a way. Like, and there's a good side of it. Like, music production is so accessible to so many people now with samples and like, you know, virtual instruments and all this kind of stuff. Like anybody can record, but like the art of like a band in a room playing their instruments, there's this barrier of entry where it's like it's expensive to get into a nice studio.
Yeah.
And to build up the amount of gear, you don't need like an insane amount of stuff, but enough to record a band where like all the guys in the band can play their instruments at the same time and hit record and everybody tracks at the same time. That traditional style of recording that you do with like rock bands, I mean that's like cost prohibitive for a lot of the kind of people that are like young and like trying to just get their music out. You know what I mean? It's hard to do that.
Yeah, for sure. No, like the rise of digital technology, that's really broken down a lot of barriers for people. So like it used to be, in order for somebody to even get in a studio and record a song, they had to be like X level of good at what they did.
Yeah, there was like a barrier there to entry. But if you look at, this goes to, like we're talking about hip hop. I have a friend that's a hip hop producer that was explaining this to me, and I thought it was really interesting that with hip hop music, you know, a lot of the people that are producing hip hop tracks, they're not even thinking of a studio in terms of like this giant fancy place. Like, a lot of like major hip hop tracks that are popular on the radio were created using Fruity Loops, which is like a free program. You know, you can get a crack version of this program. A lot of people are just using that program and maybe like a mic and a keyboard controller, if even that, or just on their computer, like stringing samples together off a splice or something. You know, it's like way more accessible for anyone, even if they don't have any sort of musical like background as a musician. There's way less of a barrier to entry there, which is cool because a lot more people can like create, a lot of more people can put music into the world, but it changes like, you know, how people, you know, people's resistance is higher. You know, you have to somehow puncture this resistance when you put new music out. Like people are so inundated with so much stuff all the time. You know what I mean? Yeah.
Like the thing that's great about what's happened basically in the last 15, 20 years with digital technology, like the thing that's great about it is the barrier to entry so low, anybody can do this.
And the thing that sucks about it is the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah. My oh my.
Yeah. So it makes it hard to even suss out, like if you do want to get into something, since the barrier to entry is so low, it's harder to suss out like what is even going to be worth your time to listen to.
Yeah.
Because the one of the things that was good about, say, like a record label being the only people that had enough money to be able to put you in the studio and record an album is if somebody just had something that was produced in a professional studio, you knew they were at least X amount good. They were at least good enough to get a record label to say, hey, let's throw, you know, tens of thousands of dollars at recording this guy.
Well, I'll tell you what's interesting is, and I've learned this from like having friends that produce hip hop music, and I'm fascinated by the world of hip hop. I just think it's like a really interesting as a genre. It's really cool to me. Like really good hip hop is like really powerful. You know, it just really like it's real like potent and like straightforward and like I don't know. I like really good hip hop, but the industry of hip hop is really interesting to me. Like hip hop producers like sell their beats. Like you see a lot of guys online selling beats, right? And if you want to buy a beat to where it's exclusive and you're the only person using it, that's like probably more expensive than like you can kind of like license a beat and like rap over it, but other people might have the same beat.
Right.
So like the hustle for a hip hop producer is totally different than the hustle for like a country producer or a pop producer. It's like a totally different thing.
So I wonder how they negotiate the money on that. So if you like give somebody basically an exclusive license to use a song, do they then have to consider you a songwriter, or is that basically a work for hire?
Well, I've been reading that there's actually been incidences where I've seen situations where there was like massive hip hop hits, and the producer that made the track ended up getting like $500 total. You know what I mean? Like they signed something.
Yeah, they basically did the beat as a work for hire.
Yeah.
Authorship
saying that they had got
residuals.
Yeah, saying they had gotten paid and that was it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, you really have to you really got to be careful, kind of what you do. Like, you don't want to lose sight of the larger picture if something really pops off. But then at the same time, you got to pay your rent too. So there's always that kind of,
Yeah.
So it's a weird time in history where you can see these people that have like gold records and like platinum records that are like having trouble paying the rent.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Broke, yeah.
Yeah. So you got to be real careful about like things you sign, and like you never know what's gonna like grow legs and like take off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but then you can't. But at the same time, you can't then.
You're
like,
also
you could turn people off by asking for too much.
Yeah, you have to be realistic too. So
it's like every rando that just wanders out of the
ether. Balance.
Yeah,
it's
weird. Just like, hey, I want to use your beat.
Yeah, it's a balance for sure. Yeah, man. Going back to the Rock is Dead talk, I remember when we had Jimmy from Train on here, and he was talking about when rock music was like starting to change, and it like wasn't what it used to be, and like what people were considering was rock was changing too. He said the point that he knew that was happening was when Train won like a Billboard award for like Rock Band of the Year, and he was like, "We're not a rock band."
Yeah.
They had like
we got some guitars,
Hey Soul Sister and stuff.
Yeah.
He's like, this isn't a rock band. We play ukulele on it.
Yeah. If you focus on the ukulele on any of your songs, you're not a rock band.
Yeah. It's interesting to me now that music is more classified by mood. Because of playlists and stuff, music tends to be more classified by mood than genre in a lot of cases. Which to me makes more sense if you think about it, except that maybe genres are more associated with like cultural implication, like the culture surrounding the music.
Yeah.
Because I've always seen like a really close correlation between like fashion, style, culture, and music. Like they're all one kind of big melting pot. So to me, genre makes sense because of the cultural implication of music. But as far as like just enjoying music, I kind of wish more people just classified music based on the mood it gave them anyways.
Yeah, I have noticed in general very few musicians, if you try to ask them to define what their music is, like most musicians have no idea how to
It's hard to define your own music because like everybody's music is precious to them. So like it's very intricate to them. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Really defining any sort of band, it's hard to, because you're just like, it's music, it's good music.
Yeah, it's good or it's bad. Like and describing music is hard too. Like when you haven't heard it and you're just describing it to somebody, it's like describing like a taste or a painting or something. It's like you just have to...
Yeah, especially because as a musician, you're going to want to focus on the aspects that aren't helpful, but are like technical and make sense to you. Like they make sense in the way that you take in music.
Yeah.
Whereas really when somebody wants to know what a band is or what they sound like, I feel like they're really asking like, what does it feel like to listen to this band? And that's never the answer. That's never the question musicians are answering when they get asked like what a band is like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. My biggest thing if I'm going to produce an artist or a band and they come to me about producing them, my first thing is trying to figure out, okay, what do you want to be? Like, where do you want to land? Like, you know what I mean? Like, where are you trying? What? Because people kind of take for granted, like, that not everybody understands the same vision that's in their head. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And people define music in different ways, and they hear it in different ways, and they feel it in different ways. So, for me personally, I always like to talk to an artist or band and like just really try to understand, like, where are they trying to go?
Yeah, like, what's the goal?
What's their vision? Yeah.
Like, are you hoping this will be like a viral hit? Are you hoping that this will be like a radio hit? Are you just are you just hoping to get like the however many fans that you already have? Are you just trying to give them content you think they'll like?
Yeah, and a lot of these things, like, a lot of bands don't really think about it, because it's kind of weird. It's kind of weird too to like create art and like put all these parameters around it yourself. That's an unnatural feeling.
Yeah.
And when somebody tries to start doing that to you, a lot of bands are resistant to that, and understandably, because it's like, it's kind of weird to like create music with all these like, put on like parameters.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Like you're chasing something, like you're chasing like pop radio or you're chasing country radio. But at the same time, you have to decide, like, is that somewhere you're trying to land? And if it is, like, how is what you're doing going to fit into that?
Yeah. Like, figure out, like, what's the end goal here?
Yeah.
Like, I understand you got a song, you want to record the song, and the song's fun, but, like, certainly you're not recording the song just for the sake of recording a song. Like, you want the song to do something for you.
Yeah, and
what do you want the song to do?
Yeah, and how do you do something a little new and a little fresh that hasn't been done with it yet, but still makes sense to the people hearing it, in a way that they're, like, really stoked about it, Because really great music for an artist or a band, like, really great music can open doors. Like, the music itself can open a lot of doors for people.
Right.
And you never know when that music's going to take on life, You never know at what point who's going to hear it, and that's going to result in a call or an email from this or that person and open up this or that opportunity. So it's hard to know, but I don't know. I could go into the production thing all day because that's what I do, but turn this little video camera off here.
Yeah, it's beeping at me.
Technology. OMG. Oh, shoot. Okay, there we go. Yeah.
Noise.
Yeah. I kind of I don't know if I miss rock and roll so much as I miss, like, the way rock and roll made me feel when I was 13.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, the way it made me feel when I first heard it. And the culture surrounding it. Like, and I think, like, the biggest way to be successful with art or with music is if you can somehow tie your art and your music into something with, like, a cultural implication or a lifestyle or, like, a lifestyle that people can relate to on that level. And then your music becomes like a vessel for something bigger.
Yeah, that also can be someone's downfall, though. Like, you remember Fall Out Boy?
Oh yeah,
they were huge for like 2 records, right? And then they put out their 3rd record called Folly Ado, and it was probably the best of those first 3 records. And it got panned, and nobody liked them, and that was kind of the end of them for a minute. They've come back around like a decade later. But that was kind of the end of them for a minute, and it wasn't really through any fault of their own. It was that, like, that zeitgeisty, getting caught up in the moment and being a part of the culture and people latching onto that. They were like the emblematic #1 band for that specific type of scene that was going on them, like that kind of like emo-y, rockery, like mid-2000s kid scene.
Yeah.
And then once that scene had come and passed, like once that scene was kind of done, everybody was also done with Fall Out Boy through no fault of their own.
Yeah, it's weird how things change. Like, a really crazy example of that is when you see, like, Radio Disney, which is like the demographic of, like, really young kids, like 9 to, I don't know, like 8 or 9 years old up to like 14 or 15. So it's like this demographic of, like, music for kids. It's like pop music for really young kids. And it's kind of like what you talked about, but in, like, the mainstream pop world. And then when they, like, turn, these Radio Disney kids can be massive stars in, like, this genre of Radio Disney. And as soon as they turn 18, they have to figure out how they're going to segue into mainstream pop to where now their audience is actually, like, 18 up. You know what I mean? It's a little older of an audience.
Right.
And it's like a lot of those acts that were really big stars in Radio Disney can't figure out how to make that transition.
Uh-huh.
Because now their demographic's a little different.
Yeah.
You know?
Sure, the content has to be different. Like, it has to be a little bit more adult, but not, like, grown-up adult.
Yeah.
Like, not talking about mortgages
tricky.
or anything. But
yeah, and then you got, like,
about relationships.
you got, like, a record
sexual...
label and all these people in your ear telling you all these things that they want or need it to be and this and that and the other.
Yeah, and you've got to find a way to, like, change your image to be...
Yeah. You see that? Well, like, look at Maroon 5. Like, what about Maroon?
Yeah.
We've talked about them before, like, their first album, which in my mind was, like, was a badass pop rock record.
Yeah, that was a great pop rock record. Yeah,
Songs About Jane was, like... the definition of pop rock to me.
It was one of those records that was just wall-to-wall hits, man. There was like 5 hits on it, kind of like Hot Fuzz, or Hot Fuss. Like, the whole record was just wall-to-wall hits.
Yeah, pop rock hits. I mean, that's like, to me, was the definition of what I would consider like pop rock.
Yeah.
You know? But, and then after that, as it got more and more pop, and maybe Maroon 5 is not a good example because they're still massive.
But... well, an example of what, then?
Well, I was going to say an example of, like, a band getting caught up in the change of, like, you know, either their genre kind of changing or the culture changing.
I think what they did is a very common thing, which is they started off as... Tegan and Sarah did the exact same thing, okay? You think about when we first saw Tegan and Sarah, and they were doing, like, Walking with a Ghost. They were the definition of, like, a cool indie rock band. And then you listen to the song Closer, you listen to their more recent stuff from recent years, it is straight pop music.
Yeah.
Like, there's nothing even resembling the indie rock thing they were starting with. And I just feel like a lot of artists that start off in something a little bit more cooler, underground or whatever, like they generally, I mean, Fall Out Boy 2 even at this point is just making pop songs.
Yeah.
You know, that just seems to be the way to, like, get any amount of longevity. Or, for whatever reason, it definitely seems to be the direction that a lot of bands just end up going.
Well, another thing, too, is, like, a lot of times when a band stops being hungry, like, their art and their music changes. Like, I remember hearing a story that John Mayer was telling a story about hanging out with Eric Clapton. Mm-hmm. And he said, it was something about, like, Eric Clapton was saying, like, if he had too much money, like, his music would suffer because he was too comfortable. So Eric Clapton was saying, like, he would spend all of his money on dumb shit, like really lavish, expensive watches and stuff, so that he would always stay hungry. So he had to keep always.
That sounds to me okay.
Like a humble brag.
No. People love to romanticize their terrible fucking habits.
Yeah.
Like, people who have really bad habits, especially people who view themselves as being artists and artistic, they love to romanticize their terrible life decisions. You know? Like, I'm sure he also has, like, really romantic ways of talking about, like I don't know, like, drug addiction and having, like, ex-wives and all that stuff, you know?
Yeah.
Being divorced, rather.
Yeah. Maybe it was a justification, but...
That's totally a justification.
But it is... I mean, if you think about it, like, a lot of times when somebody becomes rich and super successful and super wealthy, it can kind of kill their drive, too. I mean, there's very few, like, Jack Whites out there. Like, Jack White is a guy who's been massively successful, and everything he puts out is still really awesome.
Yeah,
like, it still has, like, the same kind of, like...
Yeah. I feel like the counter-argument to that, though, is... all the friends we have who've cycled through, you know, Flood, Bumstead, whatever that accounting firm is here in town that handles everybody's money.
Yeah, they're like one of those business managers for musicians, which to me seems like a horrible business. Why would you want to?
Yeah.
But that's a whole nother thing.
There's a lot of money floating around in it, though.
I guess there is.
And you're managing money for people that are bad with money, so
yeah.
you can be bad at managing their money.
Well, I think
not saying that they are.
Yeah, they do a good job. They do a really good job.
Everybody goes to them because they nail it, but however, if I was a shady person, I would see the benefit.
There's a lot of sharks, I'll say that.
Anyways, the friends we have who've worked at that office, who've just generally told us about, you know, they would never tell you specifically about anybody like, hey, here's how, you know, Lionel Richie is with his money or whatever. But they'll tell you just generally the things they'll notice. And one of the things a lot of them will talk about noticing is you'll have some artists who made a lot of money for a while, And so they spent a lot of money, and then the money wasn't quite rolling in so much anymore. But they were still spending as if they had all the money. So the first step after that, what they would say, hey, you've either got to quit spending so much money or you've got to make more money. So they would say, well, I'll just quit spending so much. I don't need to be living like this. And then, of course, they would fail, and they would still spend all that much money. And then they would say, oh, then I need to go out and make more money. And then they would go out and try to tour and make new records and all this stuff that would not work because, you know, they didn't really have that like hunger and drive to make the art for the sake of wanting to make it. They just did it because they're like, I need some money. Like, all right, you know, and then next thing you know, you're the Red Hot Chili Peppers and you're writing another song about California, you know.
Well, there are these legacy acts that like can play the same set list for like 40 years, you know?
Yeah, but I don't know how many of them are still making the money they were making at their peak.
Not the money they're making at their peak.
That's what they run into, is they're not making the cash they
well,
want.
The trend in Nashville is that everybody's opening like a restaurant bar with their name on it, like Florida Georgia Line House.
Dude, but think about Alabama. You remember back in the day, they've had their, you know.
Well,
Willie
in the
Nelson's
90s,
had,
apparently.
Didn't Kenny Rogers? He had like the chicken roasters. Like that's been around forever.
I wasn't around here in Nashville in the 90s, but apparently, like in the 90s, somebody was telling me the other day it was like a trend, like every big star, like Nashville was like vibrant, like exploding, and it was like real, you know, it was just massive and popular like it is now, and like every big artist opened up like a bar and grill, you know, it was like all these other ventures with their name on it, and then everything kind of like ballooned, and then like the bottom kind of came out, and then all that went away, and then I feel like now we're kind of hitting that again, like, you know, Florida Georgia Line has like the FGL House. Like Blake Shelton's opening a bar and grill downtown.
Alan Jackson's got
Alan
AJ's.
Jackson. Yeah, it's like, I mean, it's a smart move. It's a smart move. I think so. Like,
I mean, in general, my understanding is opening restaurants is always pretty dicey. And if you compound that with the fact that these are people who probably don't know how to run restaurants.
Well, they're probably just licensing their name, though.
I mean, well, that's totally different than like opening up your own restaurant.
It's hard to know. I don't know how they're doing it. I'm sure they're like partnering with people that kind of know what they're doing in that world.
Yeah. Hopefully.
At least I would hope.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it definitely won't work.
Because I'm sure when you have that kind of money and that kind of name recognition, there's always somebody trying to get you to like jump in on their thing.
Oh, of course. Of course. I've been on the road with like really big artists that were like really successful. I've been sitting on the tour bus with like some pretty famous artists. Well, like people were on the bus pitching things to them, and sometimes it's kind of comical. I'm like, man, these people are thirsty, dude. Like just pitching these ideas to them and stuff. But yeah, that's definitely a thing. I mean, if somebody's successful, somebody has money, and somebody has that. I mean, there's always going to be people that are.
So how did that feel different when you're on the bus with John Rich, who is a person who does fancy himself as a businessman?
He is a businessman.
How is that different than, say, when somebody was pitching something to somebody who's not necessarily a businessman?
I'll say I learned a lot about business from John Rich.
How so?
Well, for one, he's a risk taker, but not blind risks. He's like very smart risk taker, and his ideas are creative, and his ideas make sense. You know, he comes up with ideas that make sense. Like, they're ideas that solve solutions to problems, you know? Like, a real business should solve a solution to some kind of problem, not just be some kind of vanity idea. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But John was really good at, like, putting ideas and pieces together. And then I saw him, once he came up with something that made sense to him, he would go all in on it. You know, he would go, 100% in on this thing. And, I don't know. It's the music business is about as risky as anything. But you can parlay like success in something and notoriety in something into something else, and I just saw him, like, the fame he had and the success he had, I saw him parlay it into a bunch of different things, and they all were on brand and they were all seamless. I'd never seen somebody do that before, like, in person. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'd never really experienced it before, and I don't know, just seeing how he navigated that was pretty interesting to me. And, and I was like, oh, okay. Here's a guy who's like, I mean, he's a amazing songwriter, written some massive country hits. There was one point where John Rich had like 5 of the 10 5 of the top 10 songs on country radio John had written.
That's bananas, yeah.
Yeah, he's making millions of dollars. I mean, he was just killing the game, you know? And he's still a great songwriter, but he'll tell you, like, self-proclaimedly, he's like, you know, look, I'm not like the greatest singer on earth. You know, he'll tell you that. And I mean, I think he's great and everything, but I remember sitting with him one day at breakfast, and he was like, why do you think it is, he used to asking me, like, why do you think it is that I've had so much success, but I'm not necessarily maybe the singer that some of these other artists are? That's what he was asking.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, well, it's just the way he puts the pieces together.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, I feel like that's one of the things that, say, like American Idol or The Voice or those shows, that one of the things that they really kind of highlight is that having a great voice is A, pretty common,
Yeah.
and B, only like a small part of the puzzle.
It's one piece of the puzzle, man. Like, the story,
and
like,
you don't have to be a great singer to put the puzzle together.
not at all. Yeah, not at all. And some of the most famous artists are not the best singers. They just put the puzzle together really well.
Yeah, yeah.
You know? And there's even things like, I've heard of, like, artists that are, like, massive artists, you know, they'll create hype, you know? Like, they'll put together a production that looks bigger than life, like, before they can even really afford it, just so when they roll into these small towns, it looks like this massive production.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, so in the mind of those people, they're like, oh, this person must be famous, you know?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. Like, I don't know, there's people that just, they think bigger, you know?
Mm-hmm.
You gotta, like, conceptualize and visualize things on a bigger scale, and, like, have bigger goals, and, like, bigger, you know, issues that you want to address with your music. Like, there's got to be something bigger, you know?
Uh-huh.
All the people I've seen that really, really have had massive success visualize things on a larger scale.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like, they're just crazy enough to believe 100% that they're the ones that are going to change the fucking world.
Yeah, yeah.
And then they end up being the ones that do, you know what I mean? So, I don't know. I sort of saw that, and I was like, you know, I want to think that way too, you know?
Mm-hmm.
There's no reason they can't be, you know, there's no reason any of us can't be doing it.
Yeah, no, there's something very humanizing about meeting people that have lived whatever your dream is.
Totally.
Because you hang out with them and you're like, oh, it's just a guy. It's just some
Just a
dude.
guy or just a girl. It really is. You know? A lot of the romanticism of it kind of goes away, you know?
Yeah.
And then you see the work. I mean, it's a lot of work, and, you know, it's a lot of hustle, and who's willing to do that work, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's a big thing. Especially country music, because country artists are so accessible to their fans, you know what I mean?
Yeah, for sure.
Country artists are so accessible to their fans, like, and that's the thing with country, like, if you stop being accessible to your fans, it's the kiss of death, like, your career's over,
Yeah.
you know? But country fans are all about the meet and greet, man.
Yeah.
But, like, if you do the meet and greets, you're cool to everybody, like, everyone likes you, man, those people will be your fan for the rest of your career.
Yeah.
Those people will hang around for the rest of your career as long as you don't piss them off.
Yeah, yeah. The meet and greets are important because you think about just how little of a thing it is to you to just, like, shake a person's hand, take a photo with them, they leave. But that's, like, a thing they're going to remember.
Yeah. Yeah, people show up with pictures and stuff from shows, like, 8 years ago, and, like, you know, it's like, it is crazy. It really is, like, the greater purpose for music when you think about it, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Because sometimes, especially musicians, man, musicians can have really bad attitudes sometimes, you know, like, or get caught up in all kinds of, like, trivial bullshit. It's like, don't even, you know, the stuff fans will go through to go to a show. Like, I've seen fans out in, like, the pouring rain, like, sitting through hurricanes and shit just to hear a band they like. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
And that kind of goes back to what we're talking about, rock and roll's dead. I remember you telling me you went to Pilgrimage Fest, which is, like, in Nashville.
Yeah, it's in Franklin.
In Franklin, yeah. And it was, like, a lot of, like, rock bands and stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
But,
yeah, Pilgrimage, I went the first 2 years. I didn't go last year. But, yeah, it generally skews a little bit older.
yeah, and I remember you saying, like, it was, like, the emphasis was on, like, comfort. Like, nobody wanted to be uncomfortable. Like, you go to Bonnaroo and, like, no one's showered for 4 days, and they're just, like, in this big, like, puddle of slop, just living their life.
Pilgrimage is great.
Pilgrimage, everyone's in their own warm bed every night.
Yeah, if you're the type of person that wants to go see a whole bunch of bands that are cool over the course of 2 days, but you don't want to be miserable, like, you don't want to have to sleep in a tent, you want to, like, get in your car and go home at the end of the day or go to a hotel room, go to Pilgrimage Festival in Franklin. it skews a little bit older, so everybody just like acts like an adult, you know. Like there's like you don't really get the impression many people are like completely fucked up on drugs or anything. Like people are drunk. I'm sure some people are definitely stoned, but nobody's out of control. And
playing safe rock and roll music.
Yeah, and it's like, and part of what's great about it is, you know, so the last show ends at a reasonable time, you know, 9, maybe 10 o'clock at night, and then you all get in your cars and you drive home. And you sleep in your bed, and you come back the next day.
Yes. Yes, it sounds so comfortable. I remember going to Bonnaroo a few years back, and it was the first time. I've been spoiled because every time 90% of the time I'm at a concert, I'm either playing or I'm there with somebody who's playing. And I hadn't like been, at that point, I hadn't been in like the audience of a concert in a long time, you know? Not that that's a good thing, but just like, I mean, I love going to shows and stuff, but at the time I was touring a lot, so there wasn't really time to go to shows and stuff.
Right.
But I remember I was like, Phoenix was playing, and I was like, I really love Phoenix. I want to like go out front and like watch this band play. I haven't been like out front and watched a band from the audience like that in a while. Mm-hmm. And it was like it was like the last day of Bonnaroo, and everyone was like super stinky and stuff, and showered and shit. So like I went out front. And I was already kind of uncomfortable because people were like not wearing a lot of clothes, and it was just this weird like kind of. And then while I was standing there watching Phoenix play, this dude that was just totally butt naked and on drugs came like flying out of nowhere, and his entire naked body like squashed against me for a second. And every time I think of Phoenix, all I can think about is that.
Yeah, you think about the story about how me and you met.
I thought I should start a podcast with this man.
Yeah, this is a man that has life's answers right here.
Yeah. He just doesn't care. It's the only place where rock and roll is not dead, in fact.
Yeah.
So, that was it. It's the end of my concert days.
Yeah, see, I've never been to Bonnaroo because I feel like artists should suffer for their music, but I'm not going to suffer for anybody else's music. I'm not going to go and smell bad and sleep in a tent when it's 90 degrees out for 4 days. And I'm not doing any of that. I'll do something like Pilgrimage where it's like, I'll drive my car there. I'll show up, you know, watch the shows I want to watch. Go, like, get a sandwich at a restaurant and then go sleep in my bed.
Yeah, you're just trying to get your entertainment from the lap of luxury, man.
Yeah, that's why most of the shows that I go to now are at the Ryman. Because going to most club shows is fucking terrible. Like, concerts aren't meant for anybody who's not young, you know, for the most part. So, because like if you go to like a rock club, you go to a cool rock club, you have to stand up the whole time. You're smushed in close with everybody else. There's people like jostling to get by you. There's people,
so did you ever go through the phase where you were into that though? Like, was there ever a point?
No, that it's like this lie that we sell to children. Like, it's a thing that you put up with because you're under the impression it's cool when you're young, and then as you get old, you're like, no, this sucks, and it's always sucked.
See, I think it is cool when you're young, like, but I never.
When you're young, like when I was like a teenager, it was exciting. Like,
I used to love dirty rock clubs.
Yeah, I used to like it when I was like a teenager, but I got over it pretty quick because I like being comfy. And,
I was going to say, I've never known you to not enjoy your comforts.
Yeah, no, and that's part of the reason that I really like going to shows at the Ryman is, the sound's good there. You know, I usually try to get like in the balcony somewhere near the soundboard, you know?
Yeah.
And so sound's always good. That you have an assigned seat that you can sit down in. You know, they got these like church pews, and you know, you can get in and out pretty quick. I've got like my secret parking garage that's always got me hooked up for $10. It's like a block and a half away.
All you need is a robe and some tea, and you'll be set.
Yeah, and everybody's stoked to play the Ryman.
Oh, of course.
It's such a cool historic venue that pretty much every artist I've seen there like comments about how like dope it is that they get to play the Ryman.
You can't go wrong.
Because that is like a career highlight for a lot of musicians. You know.
Yeah, totally. You can't go wrong with the Ryman.
Yeah, no, the Ryman's great, but you know, but then if I go to like a rock show at the Exit Inn, I'm like if I like the band, this is fine, but this isn't, you know, like I don't like enjoy being pressed up against like a hot, sweaty stranger.
Yeah, it's a little much. I mean, it's a little much, but if all those other hot, sweaty strangers like love the band as much as you do, then it's kind of kinetic, you know. There's something about it that's like that's cool. Like, you know, maybe that's lost on us as we get older or something. But when you're young and you're there with like, you know, 500 other people that love this band, you know, it becomes more like of a scene. You know, it becomes like and it becomes something bigger than the band. It becomes about that community of those people.
Right.
You know, and that's kind of what, like, if you're a band, that's what you want. Like, you want your fans to have this kind of community where, like, they find something in it for themselves other than just you. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like that. Like, they build a scene around it.
Yeah, and that's the ultimate. That's the ultimate that you can hope for if you're in a band.
Yeah.
You know, I mean,
unless you end up in the Fall Out Boy situation where the scene eats you alive because the scene's moved on
and the scene moves on without you.
Yeah. Or because with them, I felt like the scene got like openly hostile to them for just still existing after their usefulness had been done. I feel like Fall Out Boy got done real dirty. Is basically what I'm getting at here. Like, but their fans just abandoned
they're
them.
still huge though. But
yeah, but they had to like hire a special manager who knows how to bring bands back like a decade. Like, I think they got the same guy the Train had, where they said like, okay, we want to make this happen again.
Yeah,
and so this is the guy that can make bands happen again, because like the idea of Train coming back around a decade later and doing Hey Soul Sister and that blowing up, that would be the equivalent of right now if Plain White T's fucking blew up again. You know, it's like, we remember them. They had songs. We liked their songs. Nobody hates Plain White T's, but also nobody expects them to fucking top the charts again.
Yeah, of course. And that's a weird thing about the music industry, man. Like, when people pigeonhole things real quickly. Like, they identify them by one thing, and you know.
Well, so I have a theory on this. I feel like I may have talked about this before, but I'm going to talk about it again. So, I think a year or two ago, you remember my friend Rob Chanelli?
Yeah.
Yeah, so he was playing drums for Yellow Card there for a minute. He was like filling in for their drummer or whatever, and they played the show, and it was like a tribute show. They do this thing here in town in Nashville. It's a very, very like fun. It's a very Music City thing to do, like a thing that would not go over well in a town that wasn't full of good bands. But they do a show that's a whole bunch of bands get up and they each play 2-3 songs, and all they're doing is covering like 2 artists. So I think that night the 2 artists they were covering were Tom Petty and Bruce Springsteen. And so the person that books the show invites, you know, half a dozen bands or whatever, and they all show up and play 3-4 songs a piece. And the show closed out with Yellow Card was one of the bands. So Yellow Card gets up there and they do Free Fallin' and the whole thing. They did a great job. They're a good band. And when they close out the show, so the last song they played Ocean Avenue. Which was like the big hit that we all effing loved in like 2005. And it was nice because like nobody expected them to play it because this wasn't like a Yellow Card show. But everybody was like kind of hoping they'd play it. So we're leaving the show and everybody's excited because like Yellow Card just played the hit song for us. And we all enjoyed it because everybody effing loves that song. And so when we're leaving, this guy behind us is talking to his friends, and he says, "I'm so glad they played it. 7th grade was the best." Because what he was saying, and this is why I feel like sometimes bands have their moment in the sun, and that's it. Is because when we listen to old pop songs like that, when we listen to old songs that we love, part of what we're doing is we're reliving who we were then. We're remembering like what our life was like when that song was on the radio, and we're probably looking at it like through like happy kind of nostalgic rose tinted glasses. So when this guy hears Ocean Avenue, he thinks about, you know, it's 7th grade, I'm just like having fun with my friends, you know, I'm like maybe just kissed my first girlfriend, you know, I'm just now starting to get into music, and this was like the cool music that I was getting into.
Yeah,
just remembering who he was and what his life was like then, you know, because like when I think about Ocean Avenue, I think about I was living in Charleston, and I was like friends with guys who were in that kind of band, and we would listen to those songs, and we would just kind of, and I just kind of think about my whole experience of being, like being college aged and being in college and having, this specific group of friends who I don't, see as much anymore because I don't live down there. And generally just have nostalgia for that time of my life. And I feel like that can work against bands sometimes.
Yeah.
And that if a band had like a huge presence during a very specific era like that, that it's hard for them to kind of keep going or come back around because say like the Killers. I feel like that can happen to Killers for some people because the Killers were all over the radio in 2004, 2005, into 2006, and that was it. And that was like, it was a very specific and defined era where they were everywhere for a couple years. And so that's what they're relegated to in certain people's minds. And so it's hard for them to give the Killers another chance because when they hear the Killers, they're like, no, that's not the point of view. Like, the point of view isn't to give me new music. The point of view is to just play like Hot Fuss and Sam's Town forever.
Yeah, it's a whole new issue for them because it's like they've been on top of the world, but then they're, how do they recreate themselves? Like the secret sauce to put them on top of the world the first time may not be the same thing that it is the second time.
Yeah. And
that's hard. That's probably a hard pill to swallow, too.
And also part of that is just the fact that they are a rock and roll band. And rock and roll bands are irrelevant now, like culturally, because the place that rock and roll held in society, like they were at the very tail end of that being viable.
Mm-hmm. Which brings us back to our point, all rock is dad rock.
Yep.
And on that, we should probably get out of here.
All right.
But I will say before we go that if you're listening to this, you should follow us online. PodCastanova, bitches. Twitter, Facebook. I don't think we're on Instagram with it yet.
No.
But iTunes, Podbean. We're taking over the whole internet. Mm-hmm. Making the internet our bitch. One nerdy listen at a time. Yeah. All right. See you, man.